So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this one is a very strange one because this is the old version of RAMMAS ECHOR, as I'm sure you can see, and it's a free-for-all as well. This isn't the sort of map where you'd often expect something like this to actually happen. Actually, it's not the old version of RAMMAS ECHOR, is it? Because this wasn't there in the old version of this map, because this is sort of new assets, orc assets that have been placed here in the back corner. So yeah, kind of a weird map that a variant of this map that I didn't even know existed, to be honest with you. But yeah, a free-for-all, and of course in a free-for-all there isn't really any unifying themes, and that's part of the reason why I chose this, honestly, because I did actually have a look through. Not a single battle replay that I'm currently sitting on, big or small, has got a unified theme, which is rather unfortunate. It's the first time I've been in that situation in quite a long time, actually, but there's just something less appealing to me about doing a large-scale Tolfalas battle, which I do have, a large-scale Dale battle, which I do have, and there's a few others as well, like on Thranduil's Halls and the like, but there's something a lot less appealing about doing it when the factions are such as they are. Like, it is a real mess in all those situations. Like, there's nothing that I can do to even falsely make up a narrative, really, because there's like just such a weird mix of factions, to be honest with you, and people... The channel doesn't respond as positively to that, so that's the situation as it stands at the moment. So certainly the funk that I mentioned that I was in with regards to all of this in the last video is still very much present up till now, but at least with this we do have something a little bit fresh and new, so let's go and have a look through. First of all, we'll start off with Thanatos, who's the player who sent me this battle replay, who's going to be playing as the Dwarves of Khazad, definitely one of the stronger factions in the game at the moment, to my eye, just because their infantry is obviously still as powerful as it always was, perhaps even more so with the First Legion, but also the addition of the Iron Watch of Mirrormere has given them a long-range option, which is pretty damn effective in certain situations. So he's got some 3rd Legion and some 2nd Legion, so some line infantry and some armor-piercing shock infantry. He's also got some upgraded 4th Legion shield guard as well, so all of these with the armor upgrades. 4th Legion, of course, are very fine spearmen in their own right. A couple of units of sentries of Khazad, which are basic pike, but even basic dwarven pikes are still something that you have to take seriously in a fight. We have the Hammers of Gundabad, who I rate more highly than the standard 2nd Legion because of their locked morale. It can make them, even in a losing fight, bleed the enemies pretty badly. And obviously they're still just as damaging in melee. They don't have a shield like the 2nd Legion, but that's by the by, really. 3rd Legion, 2nd Legion, 3rd Legion, so a lot of Legion units over here, and then the rest of his army is here. So he's got some Orc Hunters, several units of Orc Hunters actually through here, including some Warriors of Khazad. You can see that they actually have probably the best place to spawn on this map because they're on the other side of the wall of RAMMAS ECHOR. But if I saw especially a Dwarven and an Elven player who's his ally doing this, I would immediately ring around to the other 3 factions and say, listen, we got to deal with these guys first. There's no way we can let them get away with this nonsense. 4th Legion shield guard, some guards of Khazad are over there, and some warriors at the back. Let's go on to his Elven ally, shall we, who is the Emperor of Mankind. He's got some Lothlorien archers, some March Wardens of the Woods, obviously Lothlorien fantastic with their archers, which if they can hold on to this position behind the Great Wall, they're in a pretty solid position moving forward. Some more Lothlorien archers, some Spears of the Wood, Watchers of the Golden Woods, some Woodland Protectors, so almost entirely ranged units so far with a few units of basic spears, some Lothlorien Mounted Company in the back over there, some Kindred of Celeborn with their split shots, and some Riders of the Golden Wood. There's also some Axemen in here as well, but infantry, very few and far between. The full array of Lorien skirmishers with a little bit of cavalry and infantry support. So definitely the dwarves are going to make up the front line here, I'd imagine, in any sort of fight, and then Lorien will provide a lot of long-range support. Then, here in the... what should I call it? Well, what can I sort of refer to this team as? Because obviously none of the teams are colour-coded. So we'll just say the team on the left for the time being. First of all, we have Corrigan, who's playing as the Hobbit folk. Interesting to see him step outside his usual faction, which is the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. We'll see how he does here. I mean, at the very least, he actually shouldn't make the mistake of charging, thoughtlessly into the walls of RAMMAS ECHOR. We'll see what he does end up doing. Some Proudfoot Protectors, some Ents. We have some more Proudfoot Protectors. You can really overspend on the Proudfoots if you want, because they're such a good unit. Crossbows crossed with pikemen are such a really awkward combination to deal with. Long-range, high-quality archers is probably your best bet. But other than that, it can be a really awkward foe to face. The Ents We have some battling brandybucks here in the middle with their armor piercing, and at the back, of course, we have the Beornings, which are really good monstrous cavalry. The rest of his army is hidden. It's possible he has the Eagles. It's also very likely that he has some stuff like the Farmers of Buckland and the like. But yeah, lots of the Hobbit units that can hide. Then, a faction which is not too far from here in terms of location. We have Thorbjorn, who's playing as Dol Amroth. He's got some Arathirim and some Knights of the Silver Swan, so some nice heavy cavalry. Sort of the norm for what Dol Amroth traffics in. In fact, looking at this army, I'm surprised there's not more Dol Amroth heavy cavalry. That's usually the way. He's got some Tarnostian spears at the front, some fully upgraded Ethelond men-at-arms. Just in behind them, a nice morale-boosting unit in the dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan. Not quite on the same level as regular multiple HP bodyguard units, because their stats are overall lower, but they are also a little bit cheaper, and you can have 2 of them. So much like the Dunedain captains, the ability to bring 2 offsets the fact that they're a little bit weaker than their peers. Ethelon men-at-arms there, some Doran Ernil swordsmen, more Knights of the Silver Swan, so there is another unit of cavalry, to be fair. Ethelon men-at-arms, interesting not to see the Haven Knights. Some Black Swan renegades, so a bit of AP line infantry there, some Belfast Marines, some Tirithea marksmen, and at the back, of course, the mighty Haven Guard. So the Haven Knights have left their horses at home today. Then we have the Northern Alliance. We have Elamau, who's playing as Lindon, so some Mithlond Lancers, a couple of them, obviously nice javelins. In addition, there's more javelins even from the Mithlond Nobles, really, really nasty actually, the javelins from these chariots, and of course they still fill the role of normal chariots of just being that sort of really awkward unit that rolls through your lines unless you can stop them. If you can get them caught, obviously they'll fall just like the rest. Within this little settlement, you can see that he's got the vast majority of his other units, so they've occupied this rather natty looking orc encampment. Some Noldorin Guard. We also have some Forlindon archers, some more Forlindon archers, the mighty horse lords of Ulmo, some Forlindon marines, Mithlond pikemen, wardens of Lothlorien, obviously rangers, very strong, some Noldorin blade masters and some Noldorin Guard, and that's pretty much it for Lindon. But they've taken up position in the settlement, but they can't hold this all on their lonesome. If they want to hold this little encampment, they'll need the support of their ally back here, which is Rhun, played by Exlop. There's a few names here that I haven't seen in quite some time actually, which is quite nice. Some Dragon's Wrath Warlords and some Camel's Dragon Knights are a really classic combination for Rhun. It's a lot of money to dump into 2 cavalry units, but it's worth it if you keep them together because they really are a really devastating force against infantry. Lokflag Rim and Gamp Rim, again very classic for Rhun to bring both of those units. Eastron Warriors, which I bravely put into F tier in the runic tier list because I really don't rate them at all. We'll see how well they do here. Camel's Shadow Guard are in there, Eastron Guard, Eastron Hunters. So yeah, full array of archers as well. Variag Mercenaries, good in a skirmish fight. Crossbowmen for a bit of punch, as well as the Eastron Tribesmen, Baltroth Tribesmen. And then, for the Alliance of the East, we have Isengard starting off with, actually away from their encampment to start with. They're just near these towers. We have Legatus, who's got some Uruk-hai archers and some half-orc spear guard. Just making sure that they don't get advanced upon immediately, but there's no danger of that happening, I don't think. We have some half-orc spearguard there, some Uruk-hai infantry, some champions of the White Hand. We have some Uruk-hai crossbowmen over here, some Dunlanding veterans, some Uruk-hai pikemen. That's pretty much it for the front line. Uruk-hai infantry is over here. We have some wargs as well, so some warg riders. And actually there is 2 Isengard armies, so the Isengard Alliance fully. We have Katunka the Easterling, who's got some crossbows, some champions of the White Hand. Pretty similar here, except he's got more Uruk-hai infantry with his pikes instead of Dunlanding veterans and Nazkai, but that will obviously impact his ability to bring other stuff. So a Isengard ballista, some Uruk-hai archers taking up position on and around this hill with some crossbows, infantry back there, some Dunlanding clansmen, some archers on the front as well with their stakes. But without further ado, let's begin. Now, to start off with, I would definitely say that if I were all of the players on display here, I would be going for the team in the south. There's no way that in a free-for-all you can allow a team to get away with using a really, really dominant position on the map like RAMMAS ECHOR offers you, because there's only one way in, and if you allow in the late game it to become a choke point fight where Khazad are holding it with Lothlorien offering skirmish support, I mean honestly that's a devastating combination no matter what way you slice it. To be honest, I think in the interest of fairness they should probably abandon their position behind RAMMAS ECHOR because it's so powerful in comparison to where everyone else is. This encampment over here is another interesting position, but I would also say that it's nowhere near as dominant because you can easily shoot over the wooden walls that are here. And ultimately it is still quite a wide surface area as well to have to deal with. But interesting here to see. It'll also be interesting to note if these gates are actually passable. I'd imagine they are, otherwise Lindon has effectively trapped their army within this death trap. This game will never end. The first engagements here are probably going to be between Lindon and Dol Amroth, interestingly enough. Nolder and Blade Masters getting ready to accept any sort of advance, but I mean we're in a little bit of a lull here because I think most players are probably surveying the situation, wondering who to go after first. I mean it's got to be these guys, like I said, for the reasons I've already mentioned. These are the guys you're going to want to go up with because look, they're already setting themselves up. They are pitching their tents, and I have to say, he may have sent me this battle replay, but if this is the plan going into the long haul of this fight, I certainly hope they don't win this, because it would be quite an unfortunate reflection on a player who's clearly sent me a battle replay where he wants to make himself look good, when all it really is taking up a very dominant position. I hope that's not the case, but we'll just have to wait and see, won't we? Well, I mean, Isengard, they're being bold because they're going to go forwards and sort of take the first, take the initiative. And if you want to try and dislodge people from behind this wall, you're going to have to use your skirmishers. Isengard do have that. They have some artillery, they have their crossbows, they have some cheap archers, but ultimately time will tell how successful they will ultimately end up being. Over here, meanwhile, we're going to have a much more even engagement, I would suggest, between Lindon, who are going to be going forward with their mounted divisions, their Mithlond nobles and their Mithlond lancers. Going to be moving in javelins first, I would imagine. I mean, to be fair, there's not a huge amount of archers that Dol Amroth have. They do have those Tirithea marksmen who could be a bit of a problem, but time will tell whether that's actually going to be enough. Oh, there's Wanderers of Nimrodel that have popped into existence as well, which is going to be a potential issue. What are they going after, I wonder? I think they were going after the Tarnostian Spearmen, actually, which is a strange target. Obviously, they're not all that devastating to Lindon in melee. Lindon will definitely have the upper hand in any melee engagements those two have against one another. The Hobbit folk moving across to help Dol Amroth. A lot of their army has revealed itself. I'm not sure why the frame rate is choppy. Hobbitry and arms are here. Fathers of Buckland, Longbottom mob, battling Brandybucks we've already seen. More Longbottom mob, Hobbitry and arms. Yawning. So no eagles, interestingly enough, but then eagles have to be used very aggressively, and that's not really Corrigan's MO most of the time. What's going on over here? Well, we do have some riders of the Golden Wood popping out as the champions of the White Hand move around. They're getting shot by the Silverthorn arrows though, and they're immediately going to get kited backwards. Champions of the White Hand, I mean, this is their weakness in relation to the Melkor's Chosen. The Melkor's Chosen would still take damage from Silverthorn arrows, of course they would, but they do have a shield value, whereas the Champions of the White Hand do not. But the Riders of the Golden Wood need to be a little bit careful here. It's a little bit unfortunate for Isengard they don't have any of their skirmishers over here. This is better. This makes me feel a little bit better about the situation at hand. I was really worried they would just pitch their tent in behind that wall and it would suck, but I'm glad to see that I was mistaken. O ye of little faith. Riders of the Golden Wood are moving out, getting very far away from the main bodies of their armies at this point. They're in no danger of routing like lower tier units might. What have we over here? Well. We also have Lindon, who are emptying themselves out of the encampment. So I think everyone has kind of come to a little bit of an understanding here that everyone needs to face one another without too much of a sort of home field advantage, for lack of a better term. Although I actually think here the only problem with this is the choke points are still very narrow. If you were to fight inside this encampment it wouldn't be so bad, but the wall does make things a little bit awkward, I would agree. So I think it is only fair actually that this is how things are going to go. Some wargs who evidently charged into the front of this Khazad line, which was ill-advised considering the presence of the 4th Legion Shield Guard. Both lines very, very close to one another. There's still the small matter of these Riders of the Golden Wood, who are just sort of really the exception to the rule in this fight so far. Everyone's sort of setting up to have a nice engagement, but the Riders of the Golden Wood are striking out on their own, potentially going to try and shoot in to all of these ranks. Interesting to see what they decide to try and target. I mean, the pikes would be the obvious choice, but most of the pikes are in the centre of the Isengard formation, so it'd be dangerous to get that close. March ones of the Wood are firing. I mean, you can see over here actually that the dwarves and the elves have been caught flat-footed here by Legatus as the wargs charge on in. The wargs actually did a decent amount of damage there to the orc hunters before falling. They were trying to get to the elven archers, I think, more lightly armoured, a little bit squishier than the dwarves in that situation. So yeah, the wargs are going to get cut down to a man, but it does interrupt the dwarven archers from firing. It allows Isengard to get their own skirmishers into position without getting hit first. And even though Isengard will still lose any skirmish fight with Lothlorien at long range, they won't get dumpstered in quite the same fashion. Rise of the Golden Wood thinking ahead somewhat, because they're actually going after Dol Amroth with their silver thorns, doing Lindon and Rhun a solid here by shaving away some of Dol Amroth's relative strength. So Lindon have set up their own army, all sorts of all-motor there are the Ents. And so now the angry staring contest between the two sides begins. I think Rhun can honestly dictate the pace of this engagement quite nicely. I didn't see an awful lot of archers from Corrigan's side of things either, so I'd imagine that Rhun and Lindon can slowly roll forward, skirmish with the enemy, take them down to size, and then move in to try and beat them in melee. That's how I'd imagine that going. Over here, meanwhile, in spite of the fact they have sort of come outside of the walls, ultimately a lot of their key assets are still behind it, Khazad and Lothlorien, so that does afford them a bit of a luxury in the sense that they can defend a lot of their important units more easily. And that's one of the reasons why, if I were the other three players on the battle, I would still be looking at the dwarves and the elves and thinking, well, I think maybe they should be the ones we go after. Uruk-hai archers, I can also hear the telltale whistle of those crossbow bolts going past. Interesting to see the crossbows used this early, to be honest with you, but I mean it will force the dwarves and the elves to commit more outside the walls, but the crossbows are definitely something you want to be using on the most elite of troops if you can help it. Although to be fair, Isengard, with stuff like the Nazkai, they can actually do, they can stand up to most of the elite dwarven infantry as well. Meanwhile, still the skirmish phase underway. Exlop using his Eastron hunters and his Variac mercenaries in exactly the way you need to, slowly wearing down your opponent, forcing them to be the ones to have to take the initiative later on. Tirith the Marksman, very heavily armoured of course. As a single archer they're going to easily be able to defeat the runic archers that are arrayed against them, but in terms of sheer numbers they are outgunned here. And that is ultimately going to be a bit of a problem here for Dol Amroth. You can see also the Wanderers of Nimrodel have just been so brutally cut down to size by the Variag mercenaries over there. And this is a bit of an error. Like with Rangers, in an open field battle especially, you want to be saving them until later on, because on the open field they're very easy to isolate and destroy in such a manner. Meanwhile, oh excuse me, Riders of the Golden Wood firing away at the Carmel's Dragon Knights. It'll be quite a... The Carmel's Dragon Knights are some of the tankiest cavalry in the game, so it's going to take quite a lot to actually bring them down. Lindon, meanwhile, are now going to move forward with the defending archers from Dol Amroth already occupied with the runic skirmishers. Now the javelins are going to be able to get close, do some damage. Again, you could argue that the Tarnostian Spearmen not all that important a unit, but this is still valuable manpower that Thorbjorn is losing out on here in ever greater quantities, and as time wears on, Dol Amroth and the Hobbits are going to have to consider their approach here, because they are definitely on the back foot. They're going to need to change tack if they hope to have any more in the way of success. Meanwhile, watch the Golden Wood shooting right down the line there with the Silver Thorns. They're actually hitting primarily Uruk-hai infantry though, so with their armour and shields they're not going to be quite as vulnerable to that sort of thing. Obviously Silverthorn arrows are going to do damage regardless of what kind of unit they are firing into, but Isengard will much prefer that to be the infantry rather than the pikemen. Archers, they were actually going to get charged by the Riders of the Golden Wood then. They should have followed through on that, I think. There are Dunlending clansmen here, but it still would have been, well, yeah, I suppose I can see why. Actually, Dunlending clansmen have got that slightly better anti-cavalry bonus than most low-tier spears have. So yeah, maybe pulling out of that was for the best. These Uruk-hai archers continuing to try and skirmish with Lorien, but obviously that's going to go pretty poorly. But there, you can see the smouldering bodies of those elves. Isengard ballista in position to potentially start firing in. The dwarves and the elves are tightly packed enough in front of this gatehouse here that they should actually have some pretty good targets to go after. But ultimately you might want to save the ballista in case the dwarves and elves do fall back on camping in behind the wall, because the ballista would then probably be the only tool you have to try and deal with that. The dwarves now going on the offensive at least a little bit, forcing those Uruk-hai archers that are really close to go back a bit. The warriors of Khazad, I thought they were going to send in the clansmen after the warriors then, which would have gone really badly for them. But nope. Meanwhile, Mithlond Lancers continuing to go in and out like the tide, and they continue to inflict some pretty serious losses. You can see now the Belfast Marines have also been targeted, presumably by the archers, but maybe also a couple of volleys from the javelins as well. What's going on over here? So still Lindon very, very comfortable. Obviously Correggan, you're never really in too much danger of Correggan being aggressive, and ultimately Dol Amroth are the ones paying for that, because Correggan is nice and safe over here on the flank, whereas Dol Amroth are the ones really taking the brunt of all of the fury from Lindon and Rhun so far. Mithlond Lance is out of ammunition now, so now they can fill their secondary role as Lance Cavalry, doing a huge amount of damage there to the Doran Ernil Swordsman. Again, a lot of the damage Dol Amroth has taken, aside from their ranges, has been on their less impressive units, but at this point their army is really starting to look very battered. And we're actually getting closer and closer to the point now where I'd imagine when Rhun run their ammunition supply completely dry, they're probably in a safe enough place to move forwards, honestly, and just wipe Dol Amroth away. Because if the Hobbits don't move to protect Dol Amroth more than they have done, they're going to get overwhelmed here. The combination of the AP from Rhun and the melee skill of Lindon is going to be far too much for Dol Amroth under normal circumstances, let alone with the losses they've already taken. Tirith marksmen continuing to try and skirmish. You can see actually they're still intact to a certain extent, so it does show how resilient they truly are. Meanwhile, maybe pushing out a little bit more now. Khazad obviously with their heavily armoured, shielded legions in front, and some archers and some standard warriors in behind, Thorin-armed archers also, so pushing forwards a little bit. See there the Isengard Ballista trying to get into a new position, so what are they going to try and do here? Shoot down the line perhaps? They can hit some legions, some orc hunters, some march wardens. Champions of the White Hand are still loitering with intent behind that section of the Great Wall. Warriors of Khazad are now moving forward, close enough perhaps to catch those Uruk-hai archers out. I mean, I think it's going to be too late now to save the Dunlending clansmen. It's going to be too late to save the archers if they leave it too much longer. Yeah, and they do get the charge off here, so the Dunlending clansmen are going to have to hold back the Dwarven warriors. The first example of true melee engagement over here, but the Dunlending clansmen are not going to last too much longer. Meanwhile over here, yeah, you can see this is kind of what I was fearing for Dol Amroth. Rhun are now swamping forward. I'm actually a little bit surprised Lindon are not doing the same with a couple of units. I would say to augment this with the Noldorin units would probably be the best move, because the Hobbits are unlikely to be able to react quickly enough to this. I mean, the Ents are moving in, but there's so many units over here, and there is armour-piercing units as well. The Flag Rim, not quite the same as having a unit of heavy axemen take on the Ents, but the Flag Rim still won't be they're shaken a little bit. Actually, no, that's the Eastron units, isn't it? Meanwhile, ooh, hello. Carmel's Shadow Guard, so the Dol Amroth cavalry is actually chasing the Runic cavalry down. They do actually get their lances down, but not going after the Shadow Guards. The Shadow Guard are here in support. This one unit of Knights of the Silver Swan is going to be in massive trouble pretty soon, because the other supporting units have waved off for the time being. Eastron warriors are also over here getting a surround on this wing of the Dol Amroth army with the Gamp Rim. Yeah, Dol Amroth's cavalry is their only chance at this point, and even then it's a very slim chance. Yeah, Noldorin Guard are moving forward, so I like this from Lindon, sending forward some support in the shape of their elites to really hammer home the advantage they have. But the vast, the main body of their army is still waiting back just in case the Hobbits do make a move. Tukish hunters are firing away, but that's not going to be sufficient. The Mithlond Lancers are going to see them and kill them. Noldorin Guard facing off against the Black Swans, and actually a unit of Athlon men at arms. Hobbitry in arms actually catching the Mithlond Lancers unawares. I mean, that is the thing with the Hobbits, all of their hidden spears. In come the Ents. Oof, yeah, that's a crunching charge there from the Carmel's Dragon Knights. I mean, Dol Amroth here, this was a somewhat inevitable outcome of what was happening on the battlefield. Like, Dol Amroth's army was just getting completely pummeled at range, and as soon as they were softened up sufficiently, Rhun moved forward with all their force, Lindon helped them, and now Dol Amroth are almost completely gone in double quick time. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, Dol Amroth should have seen which way the wind was blowing perhaps and pulled back a little bit, not reveal their ranges, that sort of thing. But also I think a lot of the blame there lies with the Hobbits, to be honest with you. Like, they really did leave Dol Amroth to their fate, and as a result they're now in a terrible position themselves, because Rhun and Lindon have taken minimal losses getting through Dol Amroth, and now he's going to have to deal with two very strong armies at once, and that's going to be hard. Somewhat impossible actually with some of these lower tier units, but we shall see. Meanwhile, this counter attack continues. That ballista is really firing into these warriors of Khazad on the front line. You do have to commit actually to these fights, and Isengard here pushing forward with a lot of their infantry and their pikes. That, however, you can see there the split shots going into the crossbowmen to try and take away some of their effectiveness. This is actually terrible from the Isengard ballista. Like, I don't know why you would fire in here with the ballista when you've got good targets further back. You're pummeling your own men. Terrible, terrible mistake from Katunka there. And again, part of that is down to RNG, but also a bit of common sense is needed there to not fire into an area where so many of your own troops are with a tool that's as potentially devastating as the Eisen ballista. 3rd Legion infantry pushing forward. You can see the battle lines have been well and truly drawn, and actually in several places Isengard are winning because a lot of the forces were still behind the walls, and actually keeping all of these forces safe behind the walls, the marching time to get to the front line has actually been a real problem here for Khazad and Lothlorien, because, you know, this front line is just being overwhelmed and reinforcements are not forthcoming. There are wargs all up in the business of the skirmishes at this point. The wargs may be shaken, but they're really getting in the way of the dwarven archers. They look like lasers, don't they, the split shots from the Kindred, going after the Snaga, who of course easy prey, certainly. Yeah, I mean, Isengard over here, they were actually winning here as well, but, you know, those blows in the ballista have really dealt a pretty heavy blow. Isengard archers. The dwarves are a tough nut to crack though, and they are the ones which are primarily on the front line. They're going to get some support from some Lorien axemen as well, but I mean, Isengard have the numbers. They're getting charged in the rear now by Riders of the Golden Wood, but there are pikes there. Oof, those Snaga. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. So yeah, things have erupted pretty quickly in this battle, to be honest, with Rhun pushing forwards. Proudfoot Protectors are shaken, battling Brandybucks. Rhun and Lindon are in a good place actually to go forwards in this battle, unless they take really hefty losses from something like the Ents. Don't know where the Cummel's Shadow Guard went, but they'd be a pretty good unit to throw in against the Ents. Knights of Silver Swan, they're taking damage hit Horse Swords of Ulmo. Like, this is the thing, like, Haven Knights would beat the Horse Swords of Ulmo in melee, Arathirim will not. Horse Swords of Ulmo, when it comes to close combat, are arguably the best Lance Knights in the game. In fact, I would probably, I'd probably back that up and say they are. They have lower armour, but in terms of pure melee without any sort of support in a vacuum, they're absolutely devastating, and the Arathirim will not win that fight. Variag Mercenaries and 4 Lindon Archers firing in against the lightly armoured Hobbits. That's going to be a real problem. Dismounted Knights of Silver Swan are back here, so I mean, to be fair, like, they're surviving to an extent here, the Hobbits, with sort of Corrigan's layered defences. Dol Amroth is still somewhat alive with their cavalry as well, getting into the back lines now as well. Throwing everything forward, of course, does have the side effect that you can leave gaps, and Dol Amroth have found them. I think it's just a little bit late, personally. Shadow Guard and Eastron Guard will be able to zone that cavalry out, presumably. The Ents are getting pulled down. Hobbitry and arms in the back. Mithlond Nobles. There's still the Bjornings, who are fairly consistently getting some good charges in, but that's a risky charge because that's into Flagrim. The Noldorin units are pushing through. I mean, the thing is, they just don't have any chance in straight up melee, so it's on a ticking clock here as to whether or not their mounted units can actually make something happen, because their melee units are no match for the combined might of Rhun and Lindon. Two factions that complement one another quite well, actually, with their armour piercing and their skill focuses. Ballista getting actually some good hits there on the Woodland Protectors, and the initial lines now getting broken through by the Uruk-hai, but they're at this point depleted enough that the second wave of Elven defenders is actually enough to break them. flying in there, the champions of the White Hand. They need to be really careful though, because they could kill their own general's bodyguard unit. They don't. They get some more kills on the woodland protectors though. The dwarves have stabilised things here. The reinforcements are now in position. Guards at Khazad on the way forward, armour piercing as they are. Split shots firing into the other unit of the champions of the White Hand, who should probably get moving, to be honest with you, because the front line is starting to turn. Ever since all of the dwarven and elven reinforcements arrived, things have started to look a little bit more dicey on the front line for Isengard. Their pikes have done quite a lot of heavy lifting, but at this point they're depleted. And they only really have well, they do have more pikes, I suppose. They have some spear guard in the far back, but nothing really super impressive. The Nazkai presumably are already committed somewhere. Dunlending veterans facing off against the Lothlorien Axemen. Real quality discrepancy there, but at least there are still line infantry units that are available to be committed to try and stop the rot here for Isengard. God, there's still these champions of the White Hand. Like, at this point, they do have some gaps of their own that they can find, and they are doing a good job here getting in and amongst things, because the sheer firepower, archer firepower that Khazad and Lothlorien had to work with here was definitely their main strength. They've made it work so far, but that ballista is starting to recoup some of the losses it inflicted on their own side. Woodland Protectors getting charged as well. I'd imagine that was over here. Arathirim still alive. Knights of the Silver Swan. It might have been the Bjornings, actually. That Dol Amroth cavalry has been rather effectively zoned out so far. The Eastron crossbows firing into them as well. Could be the Ents as well, I suppose. Battling Brandybucks being dealt with there. Banderbrass archers. There's no escape for them as they try and wriggle free, but the Veriag mercenaries are there to block their exit. In come the Horseswords of Ulmo with a pretty tame charge, to be honest with you, but it's all over for the Longbottom mob. They're surrounded by angry Easterlings. Tookish hunters have been isolated by what little remains of the high tier runic cavalry, but they've been used in a good way. Like, I think Rhun and Lindon can be quite happy with the work they've done. They've beaten the Hobbits and Dol Amroth fairly efficiently. They still have an army left. They still have good resources that they can use. There's still some Mithlon pikemen in the back there, which in the late game fully healthy pikemen could be something which any faction would struggle with, and Mithlon pikemen are pretty good quality as well. And that's going to be the end of them, so a pretty clear victory here. I mean, Dol Amroth is still a factor. They still have their cav, which they can use to try and nibble away at some of this. But I mean, Forlander Marines are spears in melee, so while you do a decent amount of damage off the charge, you need to cycle out pretty quickly, otherwise you will take losses. But I mean, this is actually pretty bad news for Isengard, because they're further on the outside of this wall, which means if those armies do come across, they'll probably hit Isengard first. Kindred of Celeborn out of ammunition, being committed to melee. Really, really strong in melee as well, of course. The Watchers of the Golden Wood are presumably going to get into position as well. Indeed they are. Silver Thorns doing their thing. Oh, sorry. My allergies. Woodland Protectors firing their javies. Still some Warg Riders over here. This cavalry needs to be activated as quickly as possible. The champions are doing what they can, but there's only 2 of them remaining. Isengard's still putting up a fight over here, but the Ballista crew is in melee. I saw their tooltip show up, which means they don't have pretty much their strongest tool left to them. Still got some crossbows, still got some depleted javelins as well, but I'm not sure whether that's going to be enough to turn around the overwhelming melee advantage at this point that Khazad and Lothlorien do have. There goes Círdan. Good catch, actually. That was over here, I think. So yeah, I mean, Imrahil managing to drag the Horseswords of Ulmo down. So Dol Amroth, one last spit in the eye for Lindon there. But Lindon's morale is such that the loss of a general isn't really going to adversely affect them too much. And there goes Imrahil, dragged down by the spears in vengeance. Yeah, and that's going to be the end of Dol Amroth as well. So then, Rhun and Lindon still have a decent force left to them, and at this point I would slowly but surely, yeah, the Tookish Hunters are getting killed by Nolder and Blade Masters over there on the side. But yeah, I would probably approach from this angle, and I mean, you've got to go after, if you can, Lorien and Khazad while Isengard are still up if you're Rhun and Lindon, because Isengard are going to lose, I think, at this point no matter what. But to let Isengard live a little bit longer and do more damage to your enemy, which you're going to have to face, is going to be the key, I think, because, I mean, I don't know how, I mean, they still have some Watchers of the Golden Wood over here that still have some ammunition. Don't know how long that's going to be the case with them still using their ammunition. Nazkai getting shot by Kartunka. Murakai pikemen in the back, Snaga skirmishers. I mean, yeah, the Nazkai probably should have been committed sooner. They're exactly the sort of unit that was needed on the front line a little bit earlier, I think. Guards of Khazad. And at this point you can see how compromised the Isengard front line is. Lorien axemen just running through the scattering ranks of the Uruk-hai. Some Uruk-hai archers being tasked with trying to hold back the hordes, which is not really what you want against heavy elven and dwarven units. The half-orc spear guard at this point, seeing the fact that there's really nothing to defend against on the side anymore, or at least if they do still try and defend over there, they'll lose. So in they come, but I don't think a unit of half-orc spear guard is going to be the heroes that Isengard need them to be here. Don't know how much crossbow ammunition they even have left, to be honest with you, and that might be a bit of a moot point anyway, because the Lorien Mounted Company have found their way into the back lines and are running them down anyway, so even if they did have ammunition, they would not be able to use it. Now then. I mean, they do still have a little bit of ammunition, but at this point all they can really do is try and do a little bit more damage to Lothlorien. Actually, there's some half-orc spear guard here in the back lines, which is kind of interesting, the fact that they've managed to get over here. Isengard is still putting up somewhat of a fight over here, presumably due to the Nazkai. And they will be able to get into melee with the Watchers of the Golden Wood. Obviously they will lose that handily, but it will stop them from firing those silver thorns into the Isengard ranks. Keep their army alive just that little bit longer. Nazkai and Uruk-hai pikemen doing a good job here, actually. Defeat seems certain, even for the mighty guards of Khazad. They aren't the 3 HP unit anymore, of course, they're the armor-piercing one, but still. Impressive. But it's over here, like you can see the half-orc spear guard are doing their best to hold back. Stop the rot, but it's not really working. And the archers, Uruk-hai pikemen is shaken. They're trying to deal with these very depleted Lorien axemen that are slowly cutting them down. But with how scattered these pikemen are, this charge from the Legion should be done. Interestingly enough, he was about to get run through, but his assailant there got hit by javelins. I guess Balin just died of shock. Yeah, you can see this is going to be the end of this Isengard resistance now, with those javelin volleys doing a good number. Well, I say that, Isengard's still doing a good job, and actually I think Isengard have done a good enough job here. Even if they do end up losing, I think this means that Rhun and Lindon are probably going to go on to win this fight, because they were able to win much more comfortably on their side than anyone is going to be able to win over here. Some Uruk-hai pikemen still in the back. Still going to make a nuisance of themselves. In fact, it's at the point now where I'd actually say, if I were, especially if I were Lorien and, again, like these spear guard, they've sort of charged into the other side with the Nazkai. Isengard have kept this assault going. They've done a good job. I mean, the flank is still going to be a problem here. Thought they were going to charge in there with the second Legion, but they actually stopped their charge for some reason. Or did they hit some single entity or something? Or they're going to waddle into melee rather than charge, but that should be enough to see them off. But yeah, like I was saying, like if Isengard and the Elf-Dwarf Alliance over here think they can still win, then they have to sort of stop killing one another and prepare for the inevitable assault from Lindon and Rhun. But I mean, part of this is how well you deal with your opponent first, and I do think Lindon and Rhun deserve a lot of credit for how they handled a, albeit fairly poorly organised, Old Amroth and Hobbits defence. Isengard and the Elves and Dwarves over here were much more, it was a much more bloody encounter. And I have to say, I was worried that the Elven and Dwarven players would sort of sit in behind the walls and sort of use this choke point, and it would be a very unfortunate battle to behold. I'm glad I was wrong, and I think the Elven and Dwarven player over here in the south sort of acquitted themselves very well in that regard. Cavalry moving forwards. Well, you can, as soon as I say that, it's quite clear what they want to do. They see the horde approaching and they want to retreat back behind their wall. But I think you can forgive them for doing that at this point, because the force they're going to be fighting is probably going to overwhelm them completely. And as they do that as well, they're taking yet more losses from the Isengard remnants as they try and pull away from them. So it is going to cost them. Lindon have arrived on the scene now with their very depleted cavalry, so Gonna be able to take a few more bites out here. It's so... Pollen allergy is one of the most annoying things you could have, I swear. Defeat seems certain. Let's see here. Another nice charge. I mean, just getting rid of as many as they can with their depleted cavalry here, Lindon and Rhun, as they slowly but surely approach the walls at RAMMAS. Isengard here are going to ultimately win outside as a result of this, but they will also be first in line against the juggernaut that is approaching. But maybe they can do enough damage to bring Lothlorien and Khazad back in with a chance of winning. Could Isengard be the kingmaker here? I personally don't think so. I don't think they have anywhere near enough left to make too much of an impact on a force which is fairly healthy. Still crossbows left alive, and that's the thing. I think they still have some decent range presence on the field, including the Wardens of Lothlorien, which means, again, sitting on the other side of that choke point, they're going to need to organise themselves very carefully. Mithlon pikemen, they still have the Lothlorien units, indeed, varying levels of health, but the Blade Masters are the healthiest, which is nice. The flag units as well, the Loka units, not the flag units. Meanwhile, back in front of the gates, Reforged Spear Guard. I mean, Isengard, you can see that what their intention is here. They want to continue to face down Khazad and Lothlorien, but their Spear Guard are going to rout so easily in the face of opposition such as this. In come some depleted crossbowmen, in come the pikes. So Isengard will try to do just that little bit more damage, and they will succeed actually. These Woodland Protectors probably won't be enough to face all these pikemen all on their own, so they are going to have to reveal themselves. Not long left in this fight though, and you can see why. Like, the forces they were able to save here, Lothlorien and Khazad, are fairly meagre, to be honest with you. Like, they still have some good units like the Kindred and the Watch of the Goldenwood, but nothing substantial enough to stop the size of the army that's coming towards them. And as if that wasn't enough, Isengard are still going after them, inflicting yet more casualties, which would be so valuable in facing down Rhun and Lindon. Isengard are routing off though. This was definitely a very bloody fight. Another unit of Reforged Spear Guard, but yeah, just looking at the situation as it is. Huge line battle actually. I think this was definitely a good fight here in front of RAMMAS. A bit of back and forth between Isen and their foes. I would say that I think the Elves and the Dwarves would have ultimately been victorious had they remained out here, and if it was just like a standard fight between the two of them, they probably would have won that. Retreating as they did obviously made things a little bit more awkward, but they're still going to win, I think. But of course, Rhun and Lindon's victory over here in this section of the map was fairly significant. Dol Amroth, you know, classic. They got worn down, and then as soon as they were weak enough, Rhun surged forward in force. Lindon supported them. They got smashed to pieces. The Hobbits weren't quick enough or willing enough to support their ally, and you know, united you stand, divided you fall. And that was definitely the case with the Hobbits and Dol Amroth here. Every other faction, I think, has performed pretty decently on the field today, but they obviously did not equip themselves as well as perhaps they could. So, how do they want to handle this? I mean, they can handle this any way they want. I personally would just charge in all the infantry and then try and get the support in behind them. Because even if you just use pure, dumb, brute strength, you should probably win this, to be honest with you. Watchers of the Goldenwood and Kindred of Caliborn are dangerous, yes. Watchers of the Goldenwood still have ammunition though, so they're probably not going to be on the front line, to be honest with you. And there's still the matter of pikemen. Isengard units in the way, 4 Lindon Marines are there. Still a little bit of heavy cavalry. 4 Lindon Marines actually shaken there, in the face of just one volley from the Silverthorn arrows. We're actually getting some Isengard units that are right in front of them. Isengard still getting in the way. Here comes the flag rim. So yeah, we're definitely in the dying embers of this fight at this point, and I'd be very surprised if Rhun and Lindon allowed themselves to lose this fight at this point. I mean, it's not impossible, I suppose. Still have a bit of ammunition after all, but overwhelming force is the name of the game. Shadow Guard moving in with their nice attack scores, flag rim moving in, javelins throwing in as well, doing a little bit of damage to the Watchers of the Golden Wood. Did they just run out of ammunition? I think they did. So now they're going to have to commit themselves to melee, getting out those elven curved blades. Kindred of Celeborn moving in as well. Eastron Guard are in there. Still a little bit of range support coming in from the Orc Hunters. I would imagine that between them, Khazad and Lothlorien probably have them. Well, actually, no, I don't know if they do have the most kills, because the Hobbits are a very numerous faction as well as Isengard. Javelins doing their thing. Some of the Shadow Guard actually squeezing through the gaps, and they're going to be able to get through here and engage the dwarves, or at least I suppose that's the idea. Well, there go the dwarves. Or at least some of them. All kinds of Khazad continuing to fire. Balance of forces is evenly matched, it says, for the Kindred of Celeborn. They're a very high quality unit, but the sheer numbers they're facing here are going to be far, far too much. It's not as if Rhun and Lindon have got a huge army left, but they did have a cohesive army rather than just a few scattered units, which is what Khazad and Lothlorien have, which speaks well of how Isengard played, to be honest with you. The fact that they were able to wear them down that much, especially considering how Isengard massacred their own backline with their ballista. If they hadn't have done that, maybe the result would have been different, because they would have had a few more pikes and infantry to face the main body of the elven and dwarven push. Quite so. As Lindon and Rhun continue their inexorable march forwards. There go the Orc Hunters, so I think that's pretty much it for the dwarves. I think it's going to be a case of Haldir's last stand over here at the base of the wall with his Kindred of Celeborn. Mithlon Pikemen and Gamp Rim slowly poking him and his fellows to death. And in come the Noldor and Blade Masters to make sure that process is a little bit smoother. There you go there. Shadow Guard moving in, so they finish chasing the dwarves off, I suppose. But yeah, I think a deserved victory for Rhun and Lindon here, because they handled the first engagement they had very well, and they were simply able to win better. Admittedly, their opponent was probably not as strong. That's how it goes in a free-for-all sometimes. You can only beat what's put in front of you. There's Haldir. I mean, your own men are gone, so you have lost. But yeah, actually interesting, Khazad and Lothlorien did get the most kills. I suppose that's because they were facing two Isengard armies, whereas Rhun and Lindon on the other side had a less numerous Dol Amroth force, in addition to obviously the Hobbits, who are going to bring a lot of numbers. But yeah, for the reasons I've said before, I think it was a deserved victory. You can only beat what was put in front of you, and they dismantled Dol Amroth and the Hobbits very nicely. The Dol Amroth and the Hobbits, obviously, they weren't the most unified force. I mean, playing with Corrigan as your ally must be quite awkward, I suppose, because he's so eager to play his way. If you do find yourself in that situation, I suppose the best thing you can do is play in exactly the same way as he does, and sort of just move your army where he goes, because he's not going to change for you. Obviously, I don't recommend playing in that way at all, but it's better to be unified than divided in that way. So I still don't think they probably would have performed well. Maybe they would have. You know, maybe they would have lasted longer against the skirmish from Rhun early on and the Lindon javelins, but we'll never know now. But yeah, I think very well done from Rhun and Lindon. Isengard, I think they performed pretty well in the circumstance. If they had just been maybe a little bit more cautious with their ballista, I think they would have had better results. Because actually, the way they shaped the engagement wasn't too bad. In the end, where they started losing, it was purely a quality thing, more so than their play. And I think if they had just, again, the amount of pikes they ended up losing because of their own ballista was pretty extreme. And that could have been the difference maker, or at least it would have been the difference maker in the first engagement they had against Khazad and Lothlorien, because ultimately that wouldn't have been enough to then give them enough to also face Rhun and Lindon, who would have been the victors, the ultimate victors, regardless. But I think Khazad and Lothlorien deserve a lot of credit for not cowering behind RAMMAS ECHOR itself. I was a little bit worried that's what it would be early on. I have seen replays in the past where it was quite clear the player only sent it to me to make themselves look good, and I'm glad that wasn't the case here with Thanatos. I think they still played very well, but it wasn't a case of them dominating a battle because of a position they fortunately had. And it's nice to see RAMMAS ECHOR again as well. It's been quite a while since we've seen this map, and it was actually in a different form as well. It was in a sort of scenario siege type format last time we saw it, rather than this one. But yeah, a free-for-all on RAMMAS ECHOR, that's something new at the very least. But yeah, I am a little bit... Well, actually, we'll do the kills first before I start the wind down. Guards of Khazad very well, of course, did good on the front line. Second Legion Escalation, a lot of the armour-piercing units will do well against the reasonably armoured Isengard. Hammers of Gundabad doing quite well as well. Second Legion, Third Legion, so good performances all around from the Dwarven Infantry, which you would expect because they were primarily tasked with dealing with most of that themselves, whereas Lothlorien, most of their kills will have come from their archers. Very similar amounts of kills for both armies it was as well. But like I was saying, I'm a little bit concerned actually, because a lot of the replays that I've got, I still have a few that I can do. None of them really have a unified theme though, which is, you know, not as popular, I've noticed. So I do have a Dale battle, which I can do that doesn't have a unified theme. I do have a Tolfalas battle, 2 Tolfalasses actually that I can do, neither of which have got a unified theme. And yeah, I feel as though it's not just me that's in a slump at the moment. I just feel as though there's not as much, you know, going on at the moment, which is a bit of a shame. Hopefully I'm wrong about that. There is more going on in Silmarillion, but Silmarillion is obviously an alpha, so it's such that you want to be a little bit careful with what you can show. Like, you want to show sort of good examples of what the game is doing, and you don't want to obviously show like landslide victories one way or the other, which some of the alpha battles obviously will be, because maps, you know, need to be tested and the like. The factions are actually in a pretty decent shape in that sub mod, but obviously maps and certain scenarios need to be tweaked and fine-tuned so they produce a nice result. But yeah, I'm a little bit unsure at the moment. Like, I don't know what's going on. Hopefully this funk that I, and seemingly the replays that I'm being sent are in lifts soon. But yeah, I mean, what are you going to do, right? Yeah, regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next, which is likely to be probably a tier list, to give a little bit more time for a few more replays to filter in.